I declare the special council meeting of the 8th of August 2023 held in council chambers at level 2, 388 Hay Street open at 5:31. Welcome everyone. On behalf of the traditional owners of the land, I acknowledge the Whadjuk Noongar people. That should have been on behalf of the city, but never mind. Attendances. We've got councillors Powell and White attending electronically with prior permission, both zooming in from overseas. Councillor Powell is on approved leave but attending nonetheless. We've got a single absence, Councillor Wise, and that'd be Councillor Hammersley, who's on approved leave, leaving myself, Councillor De Vries, Councillor Stroud, Councillor Kosovic, Councillor Jennings and Councillor Burns attending in person. CEO Colin Cameron is on leave. Lynette Solomons is therefore the Acting Chief Executive Officer. And the executive leadership team, the remainder of it is here in person and supported by other planning staff as needed. Okay, are there any disclosures of interest this evening? Nope. There's no public questions submitted for public question time, so we'll get straight into public statement time. We've got a statement from Jane Allison of Hood Street.
He's going to make a statement, and I live in the same building, so I'll just leave it to you, John, if that's okay. Thank you.
Sorry, does that mean you're not going to make your statement, Ms. Allison? Okay. There's a final statement then, and it is from John Bolto of Hood Street, Subiaco. Mr. Bolto.
Thank you. I'm John Bolto. I'm the chairman of the Council of Owners for the strata company at Subi Strand, which is the adjoining building 26 to 30 Hood Street. I have made a submission to the council regarding the proposed development. I'd like to make a short statement to the council on the following items with regard to the approval of this development at the special meeting on the 8th of August. Point 1, this building is effectively nine stories high, including the rooftop common area, and this significantly exceeds the Coles building and the 3 other surrounding mixed-use developments, which are all 7 stories or effectively 7 stories high. The Coles building not being 7, but it is that height. This is outside the height limits under the planning scheme for Subi Centro and a significant deviation from the prior approvals in the area. Hence, the development proposal should be rejected on this basis alone. Second point, the air conditioning units are situated on the side of the building facing 26 to 30 Hood Street, which is Subi Strand, with no obvious enclosure, neither soundproofing nor visual. The other buildings in the area have their air conditioning units on their roof with suitable shielding for both visual and noise attenuation. The proposed location of the air conditioning units on 22 to 24 Hood Street will not achieve these outcomes, that is, noise attenuation and visual, and is unsuitable, will degrade the amenity of the surrounding residents. Point 3, the overheight ground floor means that all floors in both developments of 26 Hood Street will overlook other floors. This is a significant architectural oversight. Not to mention that it would degrade the streetscape of the whole street by having misaligned floors. Overlooking other residents is to be minimised, and we consider it's unsafe in a high-density development. The ground floor of the development should match the height of the adjoining building and the...
Mr. Bolto, that's the end of your allocated time, but I can see you've got a single remaining point to make, being point 4 of your statement, so if you could please go ahead and make that point, and then we'll finish your statement.
Okay, so carry on. Yeah, okay. where was I up to? Yeah, the adjoining building basement should be increased in height to accommodate the car stackers, which would solve the problem for the overheight ground floor, and as a consequence should also increase the number of parking bays that are available for the development, which I think everybody would agree is a good idea. The development car park entrance is a significant traffic hazard. I'll deviate for one sentence. I've since been informed that it's outside the authority of the DA to affect this issue, but I'd like to finish the statement and add that I'd be very willing for our Council of Owners to work with the Council on this issue into the future. So there are hazarded vehicle interactions on this street on a regular basis. Adding another entry directly opposite the Coles building, no matter what the setback is, will only make the problem worse. Hood Street requires a reassessment of its traffic management plan to remedy these shortcomings before someone is killed by a car or pedestrian interaction. That's all I have to say. Thank you.
Thank you. That's the end of public statements. I don't need to make any announcements this evening, so we'll get straight on to the officer report. We've got a single item. We've had to call this meeting to deal with it out of the usual session because, as I understand it, we weren't able to, by agreement, allow any further time for us to consider and submit our RAR. So it's a single item this evening, SC1, a responsible authority report for Lot 30 Hood Street, Subiaco, with an officer recommendation for refusal. Councillor Kosovich. Okay, well, you had your hand up and so did Councillor Kosovich's. Okay, well, I didn't see that. So, Councillor Kosovich, you can move, and Councillor Stroud seconding.
Thank you, Mayor. Let me say that I'll start with the community's response to this. And I note that there are 65 objections to this development. And I know we've got people here tonight. We've heard a couple of statements already, or one in particular. And can I say to those people here tonight that I share your concerns? This is a 9-storey proposal at 30.2 metres high, and the council officers have rightly assessed this on the fact that it's overheight, and the plot ratio is exceeded. The plot ratio allowed for 8 storeys is 3.0, and this is seeking 3.16. Overall, it's overdevelopment of the site, and it has a significant impact that has been registered by those who have objected, predominantly on the height and the traffic and safety elements, also the overshadowing, particularly overshadowing for those at 27 Hood Street and other nearby residents. My suggestions are that the officer report has been rightly considered. There has been considerable correspondence between the proponents, planners and them. And I also note that in 2017, the Metropolitan Redevelopment Authority approved a 6-storey mixed-use development for this site. However, the proponents decided for whatever reason, and they don't have to provide a reason, to not go ahead with that. I'm suggesting that what we're seeing here is something that goes contrary to what we do have in the Subi Centro area, particularly as it relates to clauses 33 and 34 of the Local Planning Scheme number 5. And it also contravenes the Planning and Development Act of 2005 and other relevant planning policies pointed out in the Responsible Authority report. Accordingly, my take on this is that our good planning staff have recognised that this clearly does not fit within the requirements of our planning framework and have recommended, and I simply say to my fellow councillors tonight that we should support the officer recommendation for refusal of this proposal. Thank you. Thank you, Mayor.
Councillor Stroud.
Thank you and good evening. Okay, so we have a staff RAR recommendation for a future JDAP determination. Now, the building height for this site was 4 to 5 stories. The City LPS 5 scheme allows an 8-storey limit. The precinct has been normalised from the clutches of the state redevelopment authorities, such as MRA, who in the past approved the neighbouring sites of Subi Strand, Hallison and Encore, all at 7 stories. And that is relevant because that was the original Subiaco redevelopment scheme, and I have lived and breathed this for the last 12 years. I know it so well. Back in 2015, MRA also approved the Windsor Knight retail 4-storey commercial development, as we know as Coles and Target. It was only actually meant to be a 15% retail build, and instead it's about 85%. Now that's relevant because this design in turn has caused a great deal of traffic congestion and tension by its entry and exit for commercial and public vehicles onto a very narrow Hood Street that was only ever designed for a 3-storey precinct. It's very difficult for delivery trucks that turn in and out of this complex without hitting the curb or the footpath on the other side of Hood. A number of submissions as well as the statement tonight have justifiably expressed their concern over the traffic chaos on Hood. I have witnessed it myself, and in fact I will not walk up that street with my grandchild. However, these are not the concerns of this DA. In fact, because of its 4.75 metre setback to accommodate the alfresco setting, it is deemed by our operations team that the ingress and egress of the proposal provides a safe setting for vehicle movements. However, I do very much endorse the statement tonight that in the future we need to really try and do something as a city about about Hood Street. Back to the development proposal. This DEA proposes a 9-storey mixed-use development comprising 50 1-, 2 and 3-bedroom apartments and 2 commercial tenancies. There is also a social housing component and car parking that includes car stackers. The DA will be 2 stories higher than any existing building and 1 story higher than our scheme. The rooftop comprises a shared recreational area for residents as well as a solar generation plant and aircon units, etc. The DA has gone through a number of reviews, but it still does not meet our planning framework and is recommended for refusal. 89 submissions with only 11 in support. This has been quite a complex DA to navigate through, given the number of reviews and the history of the precinct. I certainly note the concerns from tonight and the submissions. Discretion is sought on the height and plot ratio. It's now open to Council to recommend conditionally or unconditionally, or to provide their own grounds for refusal. I would like to see Council recommend to JDAP members that they visit the site to fully understand the dynamics of the precinct and the impact of this development. Over to elected members. Thank you.
Thank you. Are there any speakers against the officer recommendation? Speakers against?
Mayor McMullen, you actually skipped past disclosures of interest at 3.
No, I didn't.
Oh, did you? Sorry.
No.
Well,
Do you have a disclosure?
well, I live across the road, but I don't own the property, so it's I'm going to declare impartiality and vote.
Okay.
I don't have a financial interest, but I would suggest impartiality would be. Proximity. Do you have a feeling on voting with regard to proximity? I'm at the other end of it. Well, it's still listed as 27, but it's the end of Vickers. You know what I mean? At the back of.
Okay, well, Councillor Burns, I think you're describing a possible proximity interest, but the proposed development doesn't adjoin your land, as I understand it. You live across the road from it, so it's not a proximity interest. At best, or at the most, I'd say it may be an impartiality interest to the extent the proximity may be perceived to adversely affect your impartiality. Okay, look, I'll take that disclosure now because we moved past the housekeeping a bit quickly and you obviously didn't hear the invitation to make the disclosure. Can you fill out the written declaration form that's with your agenda and provide it to governance and then just read it out for the record, please? In the meantime, I see Councillor Powell's hand is up. Councillor Powell, are you wanting to speak against the officer recommendation?
No, Mayor. I'm seeking to gain clarification on a few matters raised both the gallery and in the RAR itself.
Okay, let's take your questions now while Councillor Burns is filling out his written declaration of interest. Over to you, Councillor Powell.
All right. Thank you very much, Mayor, and through you to staff. Look, the RAR says that approval cannot be granted under clause 33B. And I repeat that, cannot be granted. So why can't it be granted? And really, should that just be the end of this application as far as the city is concerned?
Director of Development Services. Manager Planning Services.
Thank you, and through you, Mayor McMullen. So obviously 33B sets out the maximum heights contemplated by the scheme. That can be varied through clause 34. What the officers are saying is that it doesn't satisfy clause 33, and we don't think it is consistent with the discretionary criteria in clause 34 either. But there is discretion available to consider the height sought.
Okay, but the point I was making is it was quite categoric, saying cannot be granted, approval cannot be granted under 33B. Is what I'm saying is that's categoric. Does that mean that really, that this, that as I said, that this proposal should really, essentially be the end of it now?
Thank you, and through you, Mayor McMullen. So that's the officer's opinion that it shouldn't be, or it can't be supported under 33B for the reasons outlined in the report. But as I said in my previous answer, that doesn't preclude an ability to consider it through clause 34, which officers have done, and we're not satisfied that it meets the relevant discretionary criteria in clause 34.
All right, thank you. Look, I've got a few other questions, if I may. Quite a number of the objectors were concerned about overshadowing of their apartments in adjacent apartment complexes. Why are they not getting any protections from overshadowing?
Thank you, and through you, Mayor McMullen. So I guess the acceptable outcome requirement in Volume 2 of the R codes for this density code is that, I guess it effectively acknowledges that overshadowing is going to occur. So there is no set requirement. That doesn't necessarily mean that overshadowing should occur in all instances. So as outlined in our responsible authority report, there is instances where shadow is going to be cast, and we provide some good context about what the 2017 approval would have done in our planning assessment, which is one of the attachments, versus what is being proposed by this application. So with this application, it does actually have greater setbacks to the southwest than what was afforded or proposed by the 2017 approval, but there is some 3D imaging that we've included as well, and it's in our attachment, our planning attachment under orientation, which I'd suggest you have a quick look at if you can. But yeah, shadowing is definitely a relevant consideration for this application.
I suppose what I'm trying to get to, though, is if the land is zoned R80 or above, do they lose their protections?
Thank you, and through you, Mayor McMullen. Yeah, that's effectively the case in, I guess, higher density coded areas, which is different to lower density coded areas because the expectations are different.
Okay, so that yeah, so they don't have any protections. Look, as has been raised as well by both speakers and by members of the gallery and by people opposed to it, there's a lot of concern about Hood Street. You know, it's a very narrow street. Look, you know, sort of from my experience, there's almost as many crossovers as there is pedestrian footpath. Now, and the proposed crossover to this new building is would be virtually opposite Coles and its parking and loading areas. And yet the applicants have said that they didn't have to provide a traffic impact statement. But I note that they have, but why weren't they required to provide a traffic impact statement and address the traffic issues, which, you know, is just such a key concern of so many people with this proposal? So how could they not provide one?
Thank you, and through you, Mayor McMullen. So this application did actually provide a traffic impact statement. It's one of the attachments to the Responsible Authority report, and that was considered by the city's engineering services team, and Director Hamley might be able to provide some more commentary regarding that if required.
Look, I note that they did provide one, but I don't know whether it actually addressed so much of the issues with the Coles and with the street itself, except to note that there seems to be adequate pedestrian access in the areas, etc. The main point for me is if you've got this development and future developments coming, do they have to provide traffic impact statements? I mean, because surely this is going to affect the street. Is there something that says that they have to, or how can they not provide them? I'm asking, I suppose.
Councillor Powell, I don't know if you heard the previous answer, but they have provided one. They provided one.
I am aware that they have provided one, but they don't have to. The question is, why don't they have to?
Councillor Powell, maybe if I could assist in that, there's two types of traffic documentation that can be provided. So with developments, they can provide either a traffic impact assessment or a traffic impact statement. So there's a high criteria for a traffic impact assessment over a certain number of dwellings. In this case, they didn't need to do that. They only needed to provide a traffic impact statement. The main difference between the two sets of documents is that an impact assessment will look at what is going to be occurring with future development, whereas an impact statement will be looking at that particular development and how it impacts on that road. So hopefully that helps answer the question. And James, if you have anything else to add,
no, thank you. That clarifies it quite a bit. That's essentially what I was trying to get to. Where are the loading and unloading bays for this development? Where are they planned to be? And I don't mean for residents, you know, who may be moving in and out, but you know, there's a commercial element to this as well, you know, with the cafe, office, etc. So, considering Coles has got its loading and parking on the opposite side, where is it going to be for this Hood Street development? I didn't quite see it in the plans.
Yep, thank you, and through you, Mayor McMullen. So there is commercial car parking on site that is available for use for, I guess, deliveries and service vehicles and the like. There's no dedicated loading dock like you'd probably expect in a large supermarket like Coles, but there is I think there's one or two loading bays within Hood Street closer towards Coles.
So is that going to be that's the question. Is it sufficient, if you're going to be having this development and other developments along that street?
Thank you, and through you, Mayor McMullen. So under the city's planning framework, there's no requirement to have dedicated loading bays for this development.
Okay, all right. Moving on. It's it's to the waste management plan, and I think they say that there's going to be 660 litre bins going out twice a week, and they're going to be picked up from the Verge. So, firstly, I thought there was an aim at some stage to have waste collection to be done on site. So, what's happened with that? And then I've got a couple of other questions about the waste collection in regard to
it. Director Technical Services.
Thank you, and free presiding member. So you're quite right that they have nominated some 660 bins for waste collection, and it's really split two ways. So the commercial is going to be dealt with by a private contractor, and separately the residential component will be dealt with by the city's waste services. It's probably worth noting that what we'd probably do in this situation, if it were to be approved, would probably reduce the number of bins, and because we have capacity for 1,100 bins, just to reduce how many bins, if they're to be out on the street. We don't encourage having bins for collection by waste staff within the property. Typically, we'd try and have it presented on public accessible land. There's just some various requirements for staff and insurance purposes that cause issue if we do have to enter the premises for something like this.
So if the bins are going to be on the Verge, I presume they'll be just put out on collection day. And if you're saying that they're going to be 1,100 litre bins, how much, they're fairly narrow footpaths, how much room is there going to be for pedestrians or people with prams or whatever to actually negotiate around yet sort of another hazard, in that street?
Yep, thank you for your presiding member. So there is a diagram, I believe it's in the waste management plan, which does show the proposed collection area, and it shows at least 1.5 metres of available space of footpath behind that, which would be a minimum standard we normally ask for downtown centres and along Rugby Road. So that's not only the minimum requirement we'd have.
Okay. And how long will it take to pick up those bins? How long will the street be, essentially if you've got a waste truck picking up the bins, the streets are narrow, it's literally going to block traffic. So I wonder how long it's going to take to pick up those bins, how long the streets will be closed off for at certain times.
Thank you for your presiding member. So I can't give you an exact time, but it wouldn't be very long at all. So obviously what we do, we prioritise areas like this. We try and do this collection first, and it really be probably a matter of minutes, just to, particularly if we limit the number of bins like we have been doing for larger developments like this one. It would only take probably 2-3 minutes, I would suggest.
Okay, all right, thank you. Look, and just two other matters that were brought up from the floor, from the statement from the floor. One was about the misaligned floor heights. How much of a concern is that?
Thank you, and through you, Mayor McMullen. I'm not sure exactly what the concern is with the misalignment regarding the floor plates. So the ground floor, I think it has a floor to ceiling height of about 4.5 metres, which is pretty standard for a commercial development, and that has been considered by the city's design review panel, and they tend to like greater floor to ceiling heights. So I'm not really sure what the misalignment necessarily, or the concern relating to misalignment is. Over the course of floor plates, heights can change for a variety of reasons, whether it's to provide for servicing or plumbing or other things. So I'm not sure if that's where the concern is coming from.
All right. Look, thank you. It's good to address it, and the also the concern that was raised about the non-shielded air conditioning units.
Yep, thanks for the question through you, Mayor McMullen. So on the development plans, the southwestern kind of facade is shown to include, I guess, an enclosure for air conditioning screens. So again, that's been considered by the city's design review panel. They like to have consolidated services such as that. There is screening showed. It's saying it's going to be enclosed as per the development plans. And if there was any noise associated with that, that'd be regulated and governed through the Environmental Protection Noise Regulations 1997.
All right. Look, thank you, Mayor. That's the questions for the moment. Look, I will have something to say in debate, but I'd just like to assimilate some of the answers I've got, so I could incorporate them in what I'm going to say. So, if somebody else wants to speak first, that would be helpful.
Thanks, Councillor. Councillor Burns, I understand governance has explained that I might have given you the wrong advice, but you may in fact have a proximity interest. He doesn't own it. Okay, Councillor Burns, have you got clear in your mind the nature of the disclosure that you're making based on the advice you would have heard during Councillor Powell's questions? Look, my understanding, Councillor Burns, is that you live across the road from this site, but you don't own that premises. Okay, therefore, I think we're expecting from you a simple impartiality disclosure. Okay, just to explain what's happening, I'm expecting that it will in fact be a proximity interest, and after that disclosure is made, we'll deal with it in the appropriate way.
Thank you, Mayor McMullen, and thank you for tolerating this. I, Mark George Burns, wish to declare an interest in the following item to be considered by Council at its meeting to be held on the 8th of August 2023. Agenda item SC1. The type of interest I wish to declare is proximity pursuant to section 5.60B of the Local Government Act. The nature of my interest is I live, but I do not hold a personal financial interest in a strata unit within 27 Hood Street. This is not part of it, but for an explanation, that's pretty much directly across the street. And therefore declare a proximity interest pursuant to section 5.60B of the Local Government Act. Hang on. Am I declaring the right one? And that's the one you okay thing. All right, I thought we'd. Furthermore, as such, intend. I haven't written this, but with it'll be a decision of council. But I intend to vote, and council will decide that. So on the agenda item SC1, and I will obviously leave the room so that the council can decide that matter.
Thanks, Councillor. So that's correct. If you wouldn't mind leaving the room, we'll vote on whether or not to let you stay. Okay, councillors, so what we've got to vote on is whether or not to allow Councillor Burns to stay and vote on this matter. All those in favour? Okay, it looks like there's unanimous support for that, so we'll allow Councillor Burns to stay and continue to participate. If someone could just let Councillor Burns know, please. Thanks. Well, this is embarrassing. I didn't ask anyone to move or second what we just voted on, so we'll have to take the vote again with a mover and a seconder.
I need to go back out?
Yeah.
Okay.
Can I have a mover and a seconder, please? Councillor Kosovic and Councillor De Vries. All those in favour? Okay, now I confirm it's carried unanimously and Councillor Burns can rejoin us. Okay, so the order of call would be that if anyone wants to speak against the officer recommendation, now would be their chance. Otherwise, I'll ask for any other speakers to the item. Okay, speakers for or against? You want to speak?
Yeah.
Councillor Burns.
Yeah, thank you. Councillors, the only thing I would add is, okay, I've declared an interest, but arguably I understand Hood Street pretty well, even though I do, just for some clarity, am not really affected by the proposition and live at the southern end of what really is Vickers Lane, even though the address is 27 Hood Street. My position is that I would ask, in considering this development, that further, and it's not particularly relevant, but further consideration be given to the two vacant lots which are owned by the same instrumentality to the east of, it would be northeast, I suppose, of the proposal that we're considering. They sit vacant. They're the last two properties that need to be developed, and it's hard not to consider that what happens, you know what I mean, when they come online. So I'm not going to project that somebody wouldn't just build a two-storey development on it or ask to build 20 stories. I have no idea. But I think it should be kept in the back of everybody's mind. So I'll just leave it at that for now. Thanks.
Councillor Powell.
Thank you, Mayor. Yeah, look, I'm going to speak in support of the officer recommendation. Look, it seems to me that this development is highly unpopular with many of the neighbouring apartment owners, and I don't think that's too surprising. There have been 60 objections, mainly on the ground of its height, the shadowing and the traffic on Hood Street. Look, the planning also seems to have fallen in a bit of a confusing hole in between the planning controls that were put in place under the old MRA, which is now devved up into A, and since it's returned to the city. Anyway, look, it has been assessed under the city's latest planning scheme, LPS 5, and at 9 stories, the officers say it does not meet the criteria to be approved. But look, the city's not going to be the determining power in this application. This will be decided by a government-appointed JDAP panel, which approve whatever it thinks is right. Look at 9 stories. This will be the tallest building in Subiaco Centro. It's approved, 50% above its previous approval height. And as council staff point out, the proposal is not aligned with the desired future development of the area and would be out of scale with the existing and future planned context. Look, additionally, there's no setback to the top floors. This is going to be entirely visible from the street. City planners don't think that's a good outcome for the streetscape either. In fact, they note that the proposed street setback of the upper levels in combination with the proposed building height is not considered to complement the existing or desired character of the street. As has been mentioned a number of times by other speakers and by many of the objectors, look, it's going to overshadow a number of apartments in adjacent complexes, and so I'm not surprised those people are unhappy. But it does appear that any land zoned R80 and above loses protections that would be provided to lower zoned residential areas. So, and look, I wonder how many apartment buyers are aware that they might have no solar rights, gauging by the 60 or so objections. Some are certainly unaware. Now, as to Hood Street itself, look, I'm a bit like some of the other councillors. Like Councillor Stroud, I avoid the street if possible. You know, it's just so narrow, and as for walking it, well, you've got to keep your eyes wide open. Look, if there's going to be, this bit by bit increase, sort of with this development and further developments, then I really I don't think I'll be using that street very often at all. And the waste management plan to me is that there's problems with that. Like, I think, sort of putting big biggins on the verge, sort of that'll be competing with pedestrians, cars and trucks and already problems. Yeah, look, I don't think that's an ideal result either. But look, I mean, the odd thing about this is not much of this really is the developer's fault. The proponent's fault. A lot of it's the result of poor planning decisions and policies made in the past by governments and their agencies. But I am disappointed to note that on sustainability, the developer didn't see value in marketing Green Star because they believe the cost of registration in the current market will make the development unviable. Look, in the current environment of climate concerns, look, I just don't think that's acceptable. So, look, I'll be supporting the officer recommendation for refusal. Thank you.
Any other speakers? Councillor Burns.
Thank you, Mayor McMullen. Through you, and as you see fit where to direct it, page 22 of the 448-page report shows a perspective rendering of the proposal. And I'd like to know of the staff whether it was questioned of the proponents when that was submitted, why to the left of the rendering it shows the existing building, but to the right on the land that I referred to when I was speaking, which sits underutilised and vacant, what stands seems to show arguably a five-story building with with a setback, and whether or not that there's arguably some I'm not saying intentional misdirection or whatever else, but it just what's been shown next door doesn't exist, isn't proposed, and arguably if it's 9 story, if 9 stories is approved, even though there's no one 9 stories doesn't give 9 stories the right to the people next door, but it's very hard to argue against such things. But that's really the nature of my question, whether or not it was discussed between the staff and the proponents.
Thanks, Councillor. Just to confirm, are we talking about the 3D modelling on page 24 of the report?
No, 22 of
22 of the attachments?
yeah, of what's listed as additional information, special council meeting.
Okay. Director of Development Services has got it, so presumably Manager Planning Services you've got in front of you. Over to you, Manager.
Thank you, and through you, Mayor McMullen. Yes, I guess that diagram's just the applicants showing what can be done, I guess, under the Hood Street design guidelines next door, and it looks to be 4 stories at the street and a 5th setback. It's not something we're necessarily questioning with them. It's quite common for development applications, I guess, of this scale to show what the framework kind of contemplates, to put it in, frame it into a context. So I guess that's why it's shown.
Any other speakers? Councillor DeVries.
I'm not going to be saying anything original here because I think everyone has pointed out that this development will definitely not get support from this council tonight, from what I can see. But what appears to me to be a common theme in the report and in the RAR is that this does not support future planning. And I think we need to think about the community that's going to be living in these areas for years to come. And we can't just think of this in the short term. You know, people want to make money. Obviously, developers want to make money from their developments, but we're here to talk about what is in the best interest of the community that has grown up around Hood Street, grown up around Subi Centro, and I live very close, so I'm actually a neighbour. So I've seen that community grow, and it has concerned me that there is a little bit of, it's getting quite dark in areas. You wouldn't want more of that. But we need to protect our community, and we don't put these planning policies in place without considering what they're there for. They're there to protect community for now and into the future. So I do truly hope that we support the staff recommendation for refusal, but I hope beyond that, we start to grow in our perceptions of what are important in how we consider and how we make decisions, because these are very long-term impacts. So, I've listened to the concerns of John Bolto. Thank you for speaking tonight, but also understand that some of those considerations can't be our considerations. There's enough in the report for refusal for me, but I note that those communities will need to address the issues that come up, such as additional cars on the road. If you've got young children, concerns about that. So it's natural that you raise them. So I will be supporting staff, and I'm sure that that's the general feeling in the room tonight. Thank you.
Thank you. Well, there's 2 councillors who haven't spoke. There's no pressure. Councillor White.
Yeah, just to say, thanks, Mayor, just to say I support the officer's recommendation. I mean, it does seem to be an area which is already fairly built up, I have to say. But I do think the rationale and the arguments presented by staff in terms of the reason for refusal are relevant, and I'm happy to support them. Thank you.
Okay, I'll invite the mover to close, and that was Councillor Kosovich. You've got a question. Councillor Stroud.
I actually have 2 questions, thank you, Mayor. One refers to that if the height was reduced, it would improve the natural ventilation and solar access to adjoining properties. I wonder, please, through you, Mayor, if we could just have a better understanding of that. Are they talking about the properties of Subi Strand, the properties across the road? I'm just trying to get a perspective on that. And I'm also talking about how much height we have to reduce. So if we went down to 8, would that make the difference? I mean, obviously the lower you go, but if we go down to 8, which would be allowed under our town planning scheme, will that have the impact of the reduction in the ventilation and solar access that we're asking for? Thank you, or seeking.
Manager Planning Services.
Thank you, and through you, Mayor McMillan. So yeah, I guess in the report now assessment, we consider that, I guess, a reduction in height would improve the shadowing to the Subi Strand kind of, the little L shape towards Hood Street. So I guess that with the height limit, the scheme does say, I guess, up to 8. It's not as of right, and it's guided by the height provisions as provided for in the Hood Street Design Guidelines, which is 4 to 5. But yeah, certainly a reduction in height would improve the shadow, most likely, for those Hood Street residents.
Through you, Mayor, just by how many stories? Would 2 stories make the difference, or does it have to go down to 4 or 5?
Mr Denham.
Thank you, and through you, Mayor. It's always really difficult to put a clear number on how many stories to remove or not. Now, removing at least 1 story would help the development with the plot ratio as well. So removing that developable area will probably bring it underneath the requirements for plot ratio. And the difference in considering the application changes once you go above 8 stories, because that's the trigger in our scheme. So it really is up to the applicants on how they might consider if this does get a recommendation from JDAP to refuse or to defer, on how they consider that. We don't really give a figure or a number, but removing at least 1 would put them in the right direction.
Thank you, Mayor. And one more. I'm wondering how we can please recommend, if it can be a council recommendation, that to JDAP that there is a site visit. I appreciate they don't have to do that recommendation. I appreciate that individually they may go there or may not, although the advice I have received from one JDAP member is that they are told that they shouldn't be officially visiting the site individually. But I wondered how we could actually include that as a council recommendation, that we recommend a site visit by the JDAP members. Thank you.
Director of Development Services.
Thank you, and through you, Mayor. Potentially the easiest way to do that is to add a line at the end of the recommendation which just says that the officer recommendation for refusal, and then it goes on to say is adopted and included in the council recommendation in the relevant section of the responsible authority report, with the addition of a recommendation to the JDAP that they visit the site. Something along those lines would suffice, and that's visiting the site is absolutely critical, and that's something that our planning officers do, and we would in any event recommend that JDAP members do.
So I think we're talking about an amendment.
We haven't got anybody left.
We do actually. I'm happy to move it, and Councillor Jennings hasn't spoken either. Councillor Jennings, do you want to second such an amendment? Okay, so can we just have the wording up on the screen before I ask the mover and the seconder if they're happy with that? Well, I know the seconder will be. So the amendment would propose that the motion be amended to include the following text at the end of the motion. The following text being subject to the recommendation being updated to request the JDAP to visit the site prior to considering the application. Councillor Jennings, are you happy enough to second that? And I will still move that. Councillor Kosovich, you were the mover of the original motion. Are you happy to accept that without debate? Councillor Stroud, you seconded the original motion. Are you happy enough with the amendment? We'll take the amendment as incorporated without debate with the agreement of the mover and the seconder of the original motion. So now I will ask Councillor Kosovich to close, please.
Thank you, Mayor. Can I say this to any developer out there? Look, this council isn't opposed to development, but we do have concerns when you are impacting the community, and particularly when within an area like Subi Centro, which is medium rise, some would say high rise, and there are allowances and there is a planning framework that we have to adhere to. This development originally received approval for a 6-storey development that didn't go ahead. That was by the Metropolitan Redevelopment Authority. We understand that. But this time, they haven't bothered to go down the path of properly, not taking on board the community's concerns. And I see this as not a worrying sign, because we try to be on side, but the community's concerns were considerable here, and I'm very proud of the way this council has stood up for the community tonight. By the mood of the table, it's quite apparent that it will receive all, if not unanimous support. And I'd just like to leave it at that, Mayor, and I commend this officer report for refusal to be supported by council. Thank you.
Thank you. I'll call the vote. All those in favour? The item's carried unanimously, 8-0. Well, there's no further business on tonight's agenda, so I declare the City of Subiaco Special Council meeting of 8 August 2023 closed at 6:30 p.m. Thank you, councillors, and in particular those councillors who've zoomed in from overseas. Thank you for joining us.